So imagine in India in which every girl, every woman was safe. Imagine an India in which every girl, every boy, every woman, every man, every human being is safe. What would it be like? That's the vision that I'm holding now in my work, in my talks, and it seems like a real stretch and impossible to imagine India being safe for girls. It was last year rated as the most dangerous country in the world. So if we continue doing ordinary things, it's not going to change. And it's not going to change just because of the police. It's going to change because each one of us are carriers of the same culture that makes India unsafe. So what I'm going to talk about is my own journey in doing this book, because I'd written 17 books, and so I didn't need to write another book, nor did I actually want to write another book. So the reason I got involved is after the Nirbhaya rape in 2012, I asked myself about why is this happening? And because I'm a sociologist, psychologist, anthropologist, it was what are the cultural roots of violence against women? And with that simple question, I started talking to young people, and I went to St. Stephen's College in Delhi, which is one of the most elite colleges, and I narrowed down my questioning to one idea or one concept, which is the foundation of every society. Whether you're in India or the US or Germany, this question, I believe, is the building block of society. And I didn't know this, even though I was a trained sociologist. And the question is the following: what does it mean to be a good woman or a good man to you personally today? Or what does it mean to be a good girl or a good boy of any gender today? When I started speaking to women, especially educated women in Delhi, they objected to the question. They objected to the word even woman, using woman, because they said I was being gender biased. But after the initial resistance, when I asked the question, what are the 3 words that come to your mind when you think of yourself as a woman? Or what are the 3 words that come to your mind immediately, without thinking too much, that come to your mind as a man? And from there, the story started unfolding that there's actually very little relationship between our beliefs and our daily behavior. So my book was really the question that I was interested in is the following puzzle. That we thought that women will become equal when they get educated. They have not. Then we said women will become equal, or we'll treat women as equal when they're employed, right? They haven't. And so the puzzle is, why is it when there are thousands of women going to schools, going to colleges, going to offices, earning money, that we still have so much violence against women? So I want to put these behaviors on a continuum. So rape and physical sexual violence against women is one end of the continuum. And at the other end of the continuum is how we all behave in our everyday lives. In case you think that I'm some great enlightened feminist, I'm not. I had to come to terms with my own prejudices and my own behaviors. In fact, one of the rudest shocks was when I took the Harvard implicit bias test on gender biases. I came out as moderately prejudiced against women. So that means I'm prejudiced against myself. And this is why I think it's important for us to really look at ourselves without judgment, without shame, blame, or attack. So, as I went to St. Stephen's College, and I realized that amongst the brightest students, that their definitions were more like my mother's definitions, I said, well, maybe this is an accident. So then I went to another college, another school, and then I started going to elementary schools. And I interviewed and talked to kids as young as girls and boys always, from the most elite schools and the middle class schools, on asking them the same questions. And the 11-year-old girls and boys were giving very similar answers. Long definitions of what it means to be a good girl, and you can find that in the book. So the puzzle then was, I then sort of continued doing these interviews and ended up doing 600 interviews. It was 1,800 hours of listenings and 8,000 pages of notes. So it took a couple of years to figure this out. And the challenge really was, from these thousands of pages of notes and behaviors, what is it that connects these behaviors? And my conclusion was that even today we're raising girls to minimize themselves, so that girls don't exist. That sounds very sharp, but if you look at women's behaviors or how girls are being treated, that's really what we need to unpack. So let me give you very briefly the 7 habits that I talk about in the book. And the reason I talk about habits is important, because habits are learned. If you've learned these habits, this is all training, we can unlearn them. So that is really critical, because there's too much conversation about men are like this and women are like that. It's all training. You keep repeating a behavior, you will find yourself doing that behavior even when you don't want to. So that's where the great hope lies. The other reason why these habits are important is because we've always said, even after the Nirbhaya rape and even now, you say, oh, it's the culture, right? But culture is such a big word. It's such an amorphous word. You don't know where to begin. And so I think when we talk about these habits and everyday habits, there is a point at which you can start to untangle this gender inequality. So if you accept that girls are not meant to exist, what kind of behaviors would a good girl, or what kind of behaviors good loving parents, how would they raise their girls? The first has to do with the body. So if you're not meant to exist, the most physical evidence that you exist is the body, right? Because you have a material presence. So you minimize the body. One of the most powerful ways of minimizing the body is by pretending it does not exist. And families, middle-class families, do that by silence. So woman after woman, when I ask them, how were you educated about the body? The primary response was silence. Now in families, girls, mothers are talking to the girls, and even in my generation, about periods, but only that, you'll get your periods, now you have to be careful, and here is a sanitary pad, and that's where it ends. So the silence around a girl's body is what enables a lot of molestation and sexual abuse in homes, not necessarily just within the family, but neighbors, family friends, men that the family trust, but nobody talks about it. Because if the body doesn't exist, how can it be molested? Right? So in a sense, it's very logical, which is why I ended up calling myself a cultural detective. The second way of minimizing the body is by disguising it. And this is all familiar to you, the way women dress, the amount of shame that there is around a woman's body. And girls, you see, you hunch up, and so you minimize the attention to the breasts. Because research shows that the first body part would-be rapist or molester attacks is the breast. So disguise, and the third is detachment. Detachment is the most socially acceptable. You detach from your body and you go into your head. So our overemphasis on education, that you study, 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 and you only study, has its good points, but it is totally unbalanced in that it's based on the denial and supported by the denial of the body. And then in the book I track this through and basically say, your body is the foundation. If we didn't have a body, we wouldn't be human beings. So if you deny, judge, hate, dislike your body, you're entering into a life always of lack of confidence and insecurity. And so the body becomes the foundation, and the foundation becomes shaky, and then it becomes wobbly throughout life. What can we do about it? You talk about it. You don't pretend, even if it's embarrassing. It's never too late. And so you talk about the body, you remove the shame from it, you become very factual. And for girls and women, what's really important is physical sports. Sports, and the research shows this not just in India, but especially in the US, that when a girl's body gets strong and physically free, it affects the grades, it affects whether they go to college, it affects how they express their sexuality, whether they get pregnant, whether they use contraceptives, whether they retain jobs over a lifetime. So again, simple interventions can have very profound effects. I'll just go into two other habits. The second one is the voice. Again, very logical. If you don't exist, you can't have a body. If you can't have a body, how can you have a voice? Where will the voice come from? So think about your own childhoods or your own family experiences, is that basically girls are taught to be quiet. And hence the name of the book, Chup, by the way, means shut up or be quiet. But what I want to tell you is that it's officially now an English word. It's not just a Hindi word. It's entered the Oxford English Dictionary because it's used so often particularly in northern India. If you don't have a voice, you can't express yourself in any way. And what's interesting is we raise girls this way, and then when they become adults, we expect them suddenly to start speaking and being fearless when they go into employment. But it's not only about girls or women, because when women speak up, because men are also part of the equation, and they have also absorbed the culture of a good woman or a good girl keeps quiet, they come down without knowing why they're doing it. And they say things like, a woman who speaks up is doing it to show off, to draw attention to herself, or she's aggressive. So that's happening on the one hand. And on the other hand, when I talk to men, they say, women are so intelligent, they've been so educated, they're working, why aren't they speaking up? So we get caught because we're not understanding the underlying concepts and ideas of how the training goes so women don't speak up. The other thing I should say when you talk about these behaviors, it's not just an intellectual thing. That these behaviors are overlaid with morality. And it's because they have such an overlay of morality, of goodness, that you may want to speak up, but you're still unable to speak up as a woman, because all the other early upbringing is teaching you that if you speak up, you're bad. You're violating your own internal moral rules. And it's the same thing with men. The third behavior, then I won't talk about the habits anymore after this. The third behavior that I talk about is pleasing. Pleasing behavior. Because girls are not supposed to exist, what little sense of self is left is to serve others. And in northern India particularly, we call this adjust. that we say that the girls should compromise, should sacrifice, should accommodate, should give up to others to take care of others, so that they should always be nice, smiling, pleasant, and serving others. I'll give you one little example, because it's in these little examples that you actually see the whole world. Anisha, who's 24, said that when she was 5, she loved Coca-Cola. So wherever she went, she would ask when, uncles and aunts would come and say, "What do you want to drink?" She said, "I want a Coke." So her mother finally told her one day that this is a very shameful thing to do. You mustn't ask. So she kept quiet. She stopped asking. So what's happening here? It's not about Coke. It's not about drinking Coca-Cola or how many Coca-Cola should you drink or whether Coke is good or bad. Her mother is actually teaching her that to ask for what you like is shameful. So you shouldn't ask for what you want, and you should let others decide what is good for you. Right? So the pleasing behavior, because it's so pleasing, is perhaps the most harmful behavior, because it's one-sided, right? If it was a mutual conscious exchange, you please me and I please you, that's part of human interaction. But when it gets one-sided and the expectations are all on the girls or women, that's when it becomes a problem. So these behaviors, how do we unlearn them is really the issue. The other issues, the other habits that I talk about are denying women sexuality or desire, women not trusting each other, identity, and dependency on men. I think the most important thing is to realize that each woman who shows these behaviors in men, particularly women, they feel alone. And the more educated you are, the more you hide these behaviors that you judge. I interviewed just educated, highly educated working women and students, and there was a lot of shame in hiding or saying that you're afraid to speak up, because you're not supposed to be afraid to speak up. And so the big message from framing it as training and habits is that it's not your personal fault. You're not the one who's defective. It's a cultural system. And so if it's a cultural system, when one woman tries to change or changes, then the whole weight of the entire society of the habits in the other way comes down on her and she's crushed. And that's why it's very important for solidarity and working in groups and to have strong networks, so that there's a support system that builds the resilience of women who are daring to do different things. The last thing I want to say is that, which I also say in my TED Talk, is that if we want to see these societal changes, because it's not a matter of an individual hero. Individual heroes will always be there, but the system of power inequality between men and women, and the fact that morality is thrust on women and power in men will continue unless we act collectively and unless men get involved. So we've changed a lot from the outside. If you just look around the room, the way we dress, the way we speak, it's very different from 30, 40, 50 years ago. But the internal changes haven't kept up with the external changes. I'll stop there and take questions.
My question is, I've been here for 5 weeks and I'm learning a lot about the challenges that women have here. My question to you is, you said about men need to be educated, which I totally 100% agree. Do you feel, as we start to set up network groups, are better to be separated or segregated?
I think it depends completely on the comfort level of people. I've run groups with women only and men only, across cultures, Americans, Canadians, Indians. And I've personally found that the most transformative groups, even just a 2.5-hour session, is when it's in a mixed group. But it has to be curated well, because it has to be a very non-judgmental, safe space where people just listen and share their experiences. And it's in listening to each other's experiences without interrupting the person or without asking questions, because question is also defense, is where the transformations and insights start happening. So let me give you an example. I was talking to a group in Bombay. It wasn't really a big chup circle. It was a small, it was an event of 2.5 where people had to write, what does it mean to be a man? And the women also had to be right. And their perceptions or their understanding of what it means to be a man. And it was right after my talk when I spoke to one of the guys. Two things happened. In the groups, both men and women said what they'd learned the most is that they don't listen. So if we don't listen, there's no possibility of change. So it seems so simple and basic, right? That we all imagine we're great listeners, but as we hear someone talk, we're constantly thinking of how we'll respond, rather than really thinking. And in conflict, it gets worse. When we need to be the deepest listeners, conflict is when you're ready for the attack and to sort of defend ourselves. So I think it depends on the context. If it's possible to bring men and women together and stage it in a way, do it in a way where it's not an attack on men and it's not an attack on women, I think it's very powerful for men to hear women's experiences and women to hear men's experiences. I did one workshop at a technology firm in Bangalore while I was gathering data. And the men said they had no idea that women had these experiences, and women said they had no idea that men were trading and not doing their first preference in order to meet livelihoods and parental expectations, etc.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Anamika, and I would like to answer your first question, how to keep safe ladies or girls or women, whoever is here. I think we should teach our boys, kids, how to behave with the other women, other girls, whoever is around you. We are just teaching to our girls how to wear your cloth, how to behave, what you would ask or not, whatever this. But we never, mostly 90%, 80% people, as a parent I am telling you, we never teach to our boy babies how to behave with the women. Okay, I'm your mama, you should ask this, you should behave like that. But we never teach how to behave with the other girls. So I think this is the main thing.
Yeah, that's very good.
Thank you.
I agree completely. That's boys are still being raised as little emperors. It's interesting that none of the boys said, I wish I was a girl. But many of the little girls, even today, said, I wish I was a boy. Because they see, how different their life choices and the constraints are. So you're absolutely right. And that's why I think it's very important to get men engaged. So I saw on Twitter today that some actor in Bollywood went to see Deepika Narayan's new Chapak, yeah? And they said 90% of the hall was full of women. And he was admiring it. And I said, what needs to happen if the men need to go and see it? Because it's mostly men who throw acid. And if they see it and see the consequences of this, maybe they will be moved to change. So you're absolutely right that we need to frame this, and we've got to get the men involved. Not through attack, But through getting involved in this very humane discussions, because we all think we are decent human beings. And the research is very clear, including in India, that it is the father in the families, even when the mother is working, if you ask the children who holds the power, it's the father, right? It doesn't matter whether you're working, if the mother is working from 6 to 12, if the mother is earning more money, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what she says, it doesn't matter what the father says. It matters how they behave, right? So the children as young as 5 and 7 know where the power lies. So fathers have to wake up and see what huge impact they have on their girls as well as their boys. So thank you.
Hi, Deepa. Talking about safety, and I really understand what my friend over here said earlier. I was brought up in a city called Bangalore. It was a very cosmopolitan city. And our parents never looked at us if we talked to a boy or for a boy approaching us. Our schools, yes, were convent educated, and we had things called dances, where the girls and the boys met for an evening, supervised, chaperoned, and one could mix with the boys. And I find that when I was growing up in Bangalore, there was no reason to fear boys approaching you because they were polite, they were respectful, they teased you, yes. That was the worst that they did. But today, which is supposed to be the modern era, I find that there is no respect for a woman or a girl or a child, whether it's by the father, sometimes the mother too. In public, they slap their children. I find that the teenagers today, the boys don't have the guts to come singly and talk to a girl and say hello. They come in gangs, you know. The 31st on the beach in Goa, I had an entire family of 25 people from all over the world, and we were enjoying ourselves. What was I doing? I was the policewoman there, trying to keep drunken men from coming and groping and touching old women, young women. It didn't matter. They just wanted to touch a woman. So what does it say, as she said, the way mothers bring up boys? Or what does it say about our... It doesn't happen only in India, by the way. It happens in Italy, it happens in America, it happens all over the world. But in India, I'm so glad that we are talking about it. But there's a deep-rooted, other than the body, you know, there's a deep-rooted thing which I'd like you to explain if you can.
Thank you. I think it goes back, sort of the fundamental issue is that girls and women are not valued, are not considered full human beings. So you can touch a woman, you can rape a woman, you can molest a woman. That's the huge sort of framing issue around it. I think the second thing is in trying to deal with this inequality, we've had so much rightly so focus on women. I don't think that needs to go down, but we've got to understand what's happening with the men, right? So and then when there's total sex segregation, right? So many boys don't have any contact with girls, and girls don't have contact with boys. And yet everything around them, especially now with social media and YouTube and everything on your phone, etc., including huge access to pornography, it creates real problems. That sexuality is part of human nature, and if there's no conversation about it, there's no training of girls or boys, then and the judicial system is breaking down, we are going to see more and more problems, not less. So it comes back to educating men, educating boys, in dealing with their own bodies, their own desires, as well as teaching them about girls, and the same thing with girls. There is very little or almost no sex education in schools, and so it's a mess.
My name is Ajay Kumar. I have two questions. You referred more than once to how things are in North India with regard to girls and to boys and the whole sexuality issue. So the first question is, are there cultural differences, major cultural differences within India where experiences may be different in other parts of the country, and if you have any insights on that point? And the other was that with the rise of, for want of a better word, Hindutva, is this problem going to be exaggerated? And if so, what's the way out?
Two simple questions. The first one on culture. I mentioned North India because the detailed examples that I was using were from North India, and I was speaking Hindi. We did do interviews. Actually, I spent quite a bit of time in Bangalore with both in the technology firms, IT firms, but also with groups through various NGOs. And one of the sort of jolting moments in this study was when I attended a workshop in Bangalore, which had about 36 men and women. And there was one exercise we did where the men were on one side and the women were on the other side. And some of them couldn't speak English, and some were highly educated. And the facilitator asked women to stand up, and you didn't have to say anything. She read out a bunch of statements, and one of the statements was, if you've ever been molested or raped, stand up. And every woman in the room stood up, except two. And when the men were asked the same question, two of the men stood up. This is in Bangalore, which is why I'm bringing it up. I think what's happened is that culturally it is different, a bit different in southern India, but the impact of films, of Bollywood, is very, very sharp. And so you see even formerly matrilineal societies of Kerala, where rape statistics are going sky high and young girls are not feeling safe. My study is not a detailed study of every state, so I can't speak in great detail in terms of the cultural differences. But for example, West Bengal, there's the way Bengali women hold themselves is different from other countries. It's interesting to look at the rape statistics, but just as a very rough indicator, because we really don't know. I think just 1% of rape actually gets reported. And so even though you may see increases in numbers or decreases in number, take it with a shade, take it just as a very, very rough indicator. And so those are sort of all interesting. In Goa, I was just looking at the numbers. Over the last 17%, and these are just in numbers, there's been over a 500% increase in rape in Goa. In fact, it's the highest in the country. Delhi is 250% increase in rape. So it's pretty bad, but we don't know, is it more rape or is it more reporting of rape? But what I can tell you is that women feel unsafe probably more in North India than in South India. I personally, even at my age, feel more safe in Goa than I do in Delhi. But I know, because I'm working with young women, I know that those who live in Bangalore are also taking lots of cautions, and I call it fear-adjusted behavior. We do this without even knowing that we're doing it. Like a woman who's walking is constantly alert, scanning to see, if there's one man, it's okay. But if there's a group of 5 or 7 men, you move automatically without even thinking about it. But when you ask them, are you afraid? They'll say no. But they've already adjusted the behaviors to the fact that it's not safe. Sorry, Hindutva. I think it will be very regressive. Why? Because the only thing that's held up is the mother. And there's nothing wrong. It's important to value the mother. But if that's the only role that's assigned to women, we're going back thousands of years. Because being mothers is a given. But if mothers are devalued, then there's nowhere else to go for a woman. So it's not this whole business of either or, can you be a mom and can you work? I think these are all diversions and distractions. The real issue is, no matter what you do, will your voice be heard? Are you a full human being? Can you have dignity and respect? And will your opinion or what you say, will you be, matter? Because woman after woman said, even though they were controlling lots and lots of money, that they were still afraid to speak up. And even though when the laws change, women don't assert their rights because of the social consequences of asserting their rights, including property division with brothers. I mean, the law is there, but which woman is going to take on the brothers if she feels shaky? Now, women are doing that too, so it's not that all women are doing this or all women are doing that, but I think we've really underestimated the power and the force of culture, because at the end of the day, we're first cultural creatures and then intellectual creatures. And so Hindutva, I think, can be very, very regressive for women's freedom. And we're seeing this already, this, what do they call them, Romeo squads in UP. And on the one hand, you have Beti Bachao campaigns, but the moment the Beti speaks up, you pull her out of the Beti Bachao campaign, right? So it's very, very, very limited expansion of freedom, and it will be a much greater contraction of independence and dignity for women. Please, can you use the mic, please? Oh, there's someone there.
Hi Deepa, my name is Mohini. Now what I'm going to ask is not a question, but it's basically about taking your opinion on it. How do you see financial dependence of a woman, and how does it affect her position in society and family as a whole?
Brilliant question. Thank you for asking that. My own thinking on this has changed. One of the things I didn't say is, as part of doing this work, I spent 2 years traveling in rural areas, going to self-help groups in UP, Chhattisgarh, and Andhra Pradesh. And these self-help groups in rural areas are all about financial independence and also about the social solidarity. So you have poor women who are afraid to speak up, who are being abused, who have no say, coming together, and in the beginning they can't even look at each other. And through these behavioral changes, they're coming together in networks now and standing up and asking for their rights. Like if a woman is thrown out, 100 women go and sit outside the man's house and don't leave till the man takes some action. So on the one hand, financial independence of women is very important because it gives them more choices. Please come in. It gives them more financial choices. Now, 2 things. One is that the research shows that if you only focus on women, and this comes back to your comment about getting boys and men involved, is we're not seeing this as a joint venture. So if you push the power of one person in a dyad, and the other person is not prepared for that, they assume that they're going to lose power, then they fight. So I would divide it up in terms of the research that when you have women's financial independence, about 1/3 of them increase when they're supportive husbands, 1/3 doesn't make a difference, and 1/3 gets into more violence. Because the men are threatened and their sense of masculinity and security is threatened because it hasn't been addressed. It hasn't been reframed. Now, in this series, what I found was, okay, so the research, let me just conclude on the research aspect. What's been found is that it's sort of an upward moving curve. Where it makes a very clear difference is where women gain large assets. So if a woman owns land or a house, then the picture shifts. So one of the things that Yunus did in Bangladesh was when the men were starting to say, oh, women are so wonderful because of the movement, they say, okay, move the title of your house to a woman's name, and then you'll get a loan. First there was shock, and then many men actually did that and got loans. So what I'm saying is it depends upon the cultural context. It depends on whether men have been addressed and their conversations on what it means to be a good man. Otherwise, women become ATMs. It's not just men who are the ATMs. So in coming back to the rural areas, when I talked to these women, so I wanted to probe this question. So I asked for a meeting just with the husbands, which they'd never done before. And I also met separately with the policemen. And the men, I had a young woman with me, and the men, we asked them, what do you think about your wives? What does it mean to be a good woman? What does it mean to a good man? And they were saying, Lakshmi hai, hamari Durga hai, or hamari to, the goddess. And they were, and they were swaying. Is it fine? So then I said, okay, that's wonderful. Now what if she stopped earning money? And all their faces fell, and there was total silence. So I think we've made, by this focus on just financial independence, without addressing the cultural issues around women's power and men's power, and redefining what power is. So it's not you win, I lose. So how can it be made? But these conversations are not happening. So particularly in poor households, when women start earning money, they actually get beaten up more.
I just wanted to share with you that when we were younger, and we talk about culture and what we should teach the children, we were not afraid in traveling in buses or traveling, and there was nobody passing lewd remarks at us. Maximum they were looking at us. But other than that, that was culture also. So obviously the parents were teaching their boys that dekhne mein is something else, but you're not supposed to pass remarks. And nobody ever did. So what happened to the culture now?
I think that's, thank you for sharing that. I think there are two aspects to it. I think one, you were lucky. Two, I think there are all kinds of things, and one of the things that's happening is that there's increased population pressure, there's increased unemployment, there are a lot of men hanging around any place you go. Yeah, but I wouldn't be so quick to blame it on migrant, but that gets a lot of it. Sorry?
I don't mean that kind of migration. I mean from different states into, say, like Delhi.
Yeah, I think the migration issue, it's I would still say that it's too easy to target migrants. I think the unemployment issue and men with low levels of education and seeing how other people live, I think that creates, it's very easy for sparks to ignite. The whole, what they see in the movies and what we see in billboards and how you're actually supposed to behave, it's night and day. And I think that's where the confusion is. But I don't think it's only, the real question to ask is, could this change? Right? And the evidence says it can. Seeing a movie where you actually explicitly say, this is wrong, changes men's behaviors. And there's evidence on this. So either we can make it very complicated or we can start acting. And I believe in the innate goodness of people. And so if you've never been educated on any of these things, how do you expect? It's like saying, it's for example, a foreign person, let me give you a very simple example, hiring a Goan staff and expecting them to know how to set the table and where to put the fork and the knife, and then getting angry when they don't do it. How are they supposed to know? So I think it's training. If we need to talk about it, we need to set an example. And if we don't talk about it, we're going to, I mean, again, the evidence says it's going to take another 200 years. 200 years before girls and women are safe. I'm not talking about education, I'm just talking about basic safety.
I want to come back to the question of listening. When in the groups, or when you had groups of men and women together, don't you, or have you found that men listen differently and women listen differently? In the sense that when what a man says to a woman comes across differently to the woman as what the man actually meant, and vice versa. Because I think there is in the conversation between a man and a woman, there are often huge misunderstandings, and I don't know if you came across that in your groups.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I think we're now sort of stepping into almost, we could get into therapeutic environments. But I think your basic question on listening is a very important one. I think there are lots of misunderstandings between men and women in everyday life, because where women come from and men come from have different assumptions, like in any two human beings. And we don't take the time to clarify those assumptions. My partners here, we still have difficulty sometimes when I'm stressed out and he's stressed out, and we both go into our code language. That I'm coming from my assumptions, which are completely different from his assumptions, and it becomes a mess. Then we have to withdraw. But in large group or small group settings, when I've set a very simple rule that you can't ask any questions and you cannot respond, that cuts off what you're saying. It cuts off all defense. It cuts off all, I'm going to judge you. It cuts off the head and starts moving people down into the heart. And it creates safety. Men don't feel safe because women react, and women don't feel safe because men react. And then there's nowhere to go. So if you change by setting very, very simple rules, and this is what we hope to do through Chup circles that could spread organically. We train the moderator online, and we have a curriculum for discussion, just like we're doing this, but it's more creative activities, so you get out of your head. And a big part of it is training in some skills, including listening. And it actually becomes fun because you start rating yourselves. You don't get rated by others. When you start rating yourself, it really becomes light and fun to realize, I'm a lousy listener too when I'm upset or when I have a point of view. And to be able to say, no, you can't speak right now, brings me down, and then I can speak again. Because most of the time when we're in our head, we're judging. And judgment doesn't lead to opening of hearts or communication in ways that we'll be able to change each other.
Men, usually they are happy. Men always happy. They are born happy, they are bred happy, they are nice. Till they get married. Okay. Tell me if I'm wrong. I would contradict when you said that we are dominant. No. You heard a phrase called the hand that rocked the cradle, ruled the world. We heard of that. Have you not? Okay? And I'll tell you, many men are here who are afraid of their wives. I can tell you that. Me too, including me also. And my wife does will look and we shut up. If I'm looking at you and my wife looks at me, I'll look down. That'll happen. Now I want you to ask me, tell me why. Do men or their father-in-laws have problems? Or a daughter and a mother-in-law will have more problems? It's in-laws, okay? Do we, see, I got a son-in-law. I love him and he loves me a lot. But I have a daughter. She doesn't love her mother-in-law. Then I've got two daughters. She's the same. She hates her mother-in-law.
Okay.
Why is that?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for asking that question. I think it gets to the crux of the matter. And I would urge you to look at it from a framework of power. Who has power? How much power? And is there any way the power equation can change? So I've heard this over and over again, and I've seen it in many families. Often, not always, because there are lots of conflicts between fathers and sons. In fact, sons leave their home because the fathers want to control them and have them do what they want, they think is right. But putting that aside, men, it's easier for men to get along because they are both people of power. The moment you get to the women, the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law are fighting for the son to access, because the only way of getting power is to access that son's power. So, if you were powerless, you would behave in exactly the same way. It has nothing to do with women and men. It has to do with who owns power, who controls the decisions, who controls the resources. You change that, and men start behaving like women, and women start behaving like men. It has to do with who owns what and what decisions they're able to make. The moment you start talking to women, so one of the habits I talk about in the book, which many women said I shouldn't, but it's now out in the open, it's called Women Don't Trust Women. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Because women have been trained not to trust women, and this is really important for everyone to understand. Women and as girls, we are trained not to trust other women. Why? Because if we trust other women, and we see that we actually have no power, and it's the men who are making all the decisions, the men who have the leisure, once women get united, this system of unequal power will not work. So in every family, you can be sure that there's structural power differences, and as long as that power difference remains, that the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, unless they live separately, will fight for that poor son and tear each other apart. So please, what I would urge you to do is really talk about these things in your family. Yes, on the one hand, we can laugh about it, and that's important. But on the other hand, it's really important, because if you can change this dynamic in your family, all the women will be happier, and so will the men. So I want to give you one little example on this, because this is so real. In one of my families, it was the same joint family, but where the parents were living with the son. And the daughter-in-law was very nice, very loving and all that, but over time she went bananas. And she felt she could not go out anywhere without dragging the mother-in-law. Because the moment she wanted to go out for a movie, the mother-in-law would say, "I'm going to come." And she had no time with her husband. So she said, "Okay, I won't go to movies." So she punishes herself as a way of punishing the mother-in-law, and the relationship gets worse. I was telling the story to someone, and they said, if she would speak, why didn't she say, "Okay, I'm going for a movie this time, but next time I go, I'll take you along." So you set up expectations that are different, but this is part of the win-lose framing. If I take you, I lose, but we don't think about expanding the power redefining that power so that there can also be love. I'll end with this thing which influenced me tremendously, and it's important for male-female relationships. And this is universal, by the way. This is not just India. This is a variation of what Martin Luther King said. Love without power is anemic. Love without power is anemic. And power without love is abusive. So when a woman just, worships and worships and does everything, she becomes a doormat. And even men, the sons also call her boring because there's nothing left to give. So when she doesn't speak up, when she has no power, love becomes like jello. She's a constant sacrificing machine. But if you only have power and no love, then that's abuse. So how do we get this balance? We need to shift this balance.
As far as I'm informed, there has been a feminist movement in India for at least 4 decades now. And in the early 80s, Urvashi Bhattacharya started the Kali for Women, and then 10 years later, the Zuban Publishing House. How do you judge or evaluate the impact of the feminist movement in India within this context? Sometimes one feels that it may have even been counterproductive. I don't know.
I think we always stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. So I think the successive, and that's just the 80s, during the independence movement, there was a feminist movement, although we didn't call it feminism. So I think all that has made huge difference. It's made a difference not just in the cities, but in rural areas. One of the books they published, Zuman published, was a translation of the famous book that was published in the 60s in the US, Our Bodies, Ourselves. And they translated it into Rajasthani and Hindi. And 70,000 copies were distributed or bought in the rural Rajasthan. So these things have huge impact. We may not see it in obvious ways, but I think the publishing houses, etc., make a huge difference. I think the problem has been in the middle classes, that in the middle and highly educated classes, we've always seen it that women's empowerment or women's inequality or issues is out there, somewhere out there, not among us. It's about, so even the women I interviewed in my own study who were doing women's empowerment projects said, yes, I'm working on women's empowerment, but I don't like women and I don't trust women. Women gossip. But we don't see these problems in ourselves. And I think unless the middle classes wake up, unless people with some education and some livelihoods wake up and take this on, we're not going to see a change. And I think we can start with our own behaviors, everyday behaviors, and have discussions in our own families, in our own offices, and literally change one little behavior at a time and come up with gender promises. And have a way of talking about problems rather than pushing it away or assuming it can never be solved. Like you're the wonderful example you talked about in terms of the relations amongst the women within the family. Imagine how wonderful it would be if these women really loved and respected each other rather than waiting for the mother-in-law to die, which is what the young women say, is that I can't bear, not all, I mean there are obviously good families and good households, but a lot of women, and it was shocking and very distressing for me to read, that the young women were saying, I want you to die. And we need to deal with these.
Question? Okay, we'll take the last question.
Hello, my name is Trita, and it's really wonderful to hear you speak, Deepa. Almost like solutions that we haven't got since a long time, many decades. I'm a girl living in today's India and been facing a lot of problems on the street sometimes, and just for no fault of mine, but the very existence of being a woman. And I think it's almost, because I've worked with some Yester feminists, I've worked with Zuban and some Deepa as well. I really feel that it's becoming almost a bit boring, this men-women problem, because it's been way too long. We've been existing as human species, and we have bigger problems in front of us right now, including the planet and the very existence of human species, even regarding the air and all the plastic that's going. I feel it's really time that the two genders get together. It's a comment, what I'm making, but it's almost a question.
Thank you. Sometimes, if you look around the world, and this is a good place to end, and I agree that men, women, humans, we need to come together. But if you look at the world around right now, what's happening in the world, whether it's in India or the USA or the UK, it really is a hyper-masculinity that leads to certain solutions and wars and hyper-capitalism, etc. So you're talking about the big, big issues. But I would bring it all back to, what does it mean to be, if we change, what does it mean to be a good person, a good human being, a good woman or a good man? As long as we have the gender roles, I think we will see shifts in the big things that we're seeing, the big problems that we're having in our planet.